Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Action, we extend a very warm welcome to each one of you at Consultation, Climate Resilience, Carbon and Inclusive Growth in Asia, organized by and Asia International Development Canada. Welcome all the MNCs and our participants. Today's regional consultation meeting aims to deliberate on the pathways and the priorities to achieve climate resilience of achieving net zero commitment from South Asia. The snapshot of the agenda is the welcome will be delivered by Professor Jyoti Parikh, Executive Director, IRADe. The inaugural remarks will be given by Dr. Anindya Chatterjee, Regional Director, Asia, IDRC. The meeting is spread over 2 sessions, where the first session will focus on climate resilient development in Asia region. The session will be chaired by Professor N. Vinod Chandra Menon, Founder Member, National Disaster Management Authority, India. The esteemed panelists of the session are Professor Mizan R. Khan, Deputy Director, International Center for Climate Change and Development, Bangladesh. Ms. Ramona Miranda, Steering Committee Member, Duryog Nivaran, Sri Lanka. Mr. Sakib Navi, Country Director, Wealth Hunger Life, Nepal. Ms. Bijal Brahmbhatt, Director, Mahila Housing Trust, India. Mr. Shashikant Chopre, Senior Research Associate, ISET International. The second session will be on low carbon development and inclusive growth, which will be chaired by Professor Kirit Parikh, Chairman IRADe and former member Planning Commission. And it will be co-chaired by Dr. J.R. Bhatt, Government Focal Point, Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research, Japan, and Senior Advisor, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, India. The esteemed panelists of the session are as follows. Mr. Saeed Munir Khasro, Chairman, the Institute of Policy, Advocacy and Governance, Bangladesh. Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, Director, Center for New Economic Diplomacy, Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata, India. Dr. Tusita Sugatapala, Senior Technical Expert, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, Lichen Trust, Sri Lanka. And Dr. Mani Nepal, Lead Economist, Sandy Isimod, Nepal. The concluding remarks will be delivered by Mr. Suresh Prabhu, former Union Minister, Government of India, and the vote of thanks will be given by Professor Jyoti Parikh, Executive Director, IRADe. I now welcome Professor Parikh to deliver her welcome remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Nimisha. I welcome all of you to this discussion on regional consultation on strengthening climate resilience and low carbon and inclusive growth in Asia. First of all, let me say that first out, I'd like to thank Dr. Anindya Chatterjee, IDRC, for joining here, and all the people who are in person there as well as in absentia. They are all most welcome to contribute to this session. As you know, some of you at least, that we are celebrating IRADE's 20 years of IRADE's anniversary. And in that, we would like to explain a little bit about what is our mission and how we go about doing the work. As you see, it's a research and action for development, and action means sometimes going out in the field, as well as action can be also in terms of policy consultations and learning the realities of the analysis part of it. I would like to now show you some glimpses of what we do. Basically, we have 5 thematic areas and 1 cross-cutting issue of geographic nature on Asia Center for Sustainable Development. The 5 major areas are climate change and environment, energy and power systems, sustainable urban development, poverty alleviation and gender, agriculture and food security. So these we have IRADe completes 20 years, and during this time we have finished number of reports in these areas, and we find our now last 5 years Asia Center is growing considerably, where we work on cooperation issues and so on. Next, so in thematic area of climate change research, we have a long list over the 20 years. Basically, technology assessment of renewable solar, biodiesel, energy efficiency. So that's the technology part, but also sectoral issues, power sector, transport sector, steel, cement, state. And now we are also doing state level mitigation for MacArthur Foundation. In terms of urban and rural, we are looking at rapid vulnerability assessment of we did almost about 40 cities to see how vulnerable they are to the various types of disasters ranging from floods, cyclones, and so on. We also have urban climate vulnerability index and disaster resilience action plan. Recently, we have been far more engaged thanks to IDRC on last 3-4 years. We have done considerable amount of work on heat stress. Also, Department of Science and Technology gave us the work to do in dengue proliferation. So basically, climate and health issues are covered in heat stress as well as in dengue propagation. We also have heat action plan, dengue action plan, waste management. And in rural issues, we are looking at agricultural strategies, especially irrigation, solar irrigation, and also crop resistance and crop failure analysis, water and gender. In climate negotiation, we have quite a lot of this work is done with engagement with Ministry of Environment, and we started engaging with them since Copenhagen, but then we worked for them for Paris agreement, what should be India's INDC, and we did modeling work till 2050 to see what is viable, what is not, and made scenarios from which they chose 2 of the scenarios. Actually, this work was done independently. They gave 2 projects, one to TERI and one to IRADe, and then they took a decision on what to promise at Paris. After that, continuously, they've been asking us for ambitious plan and so on. We also did work on NDC 3, NDC 4, how they are progressing. 38% capacity we have reached already. So I thought when Paris Agreement was done, I felt that maybe we could have been more ambitious, but given the international nature of negotiation, it's better to be cautious. So these are the issues in climate change. And currently, as you know, in Glasgow, I was a member of Friends of COP6 in Glasgow. And there was a lot of discussion on net zero. And luckily, India also agreed that we can do till 2070, if not 60. And we have several other modeling engagements all throughout the time. So this is what is in nutshell. However, now we are gathering about around a regional issue. Now, when we do national work as well as within national, sub-national, state level actions we are doing. And if you are, they each speak in a different narrative, and narrative is a very important aspect. Whereas industries talk about supply chain and how to minimize emissions in every supply chain. The national level people talk different language, and how to what kind of regulations should have, and how to promote solar technology, what kind of market incentives and so on. So that's one way. But now when we come to a region like Asia, then we have to think what are our priorities? What would be the common thread amongst all? Now, Asia is a very large, very heterogeneous continent where you have, on one hand, small countries like Nepal, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, and their needs are different, their problems are different. We have large country like India and Indonesia, a lot of coastal zones, and so on. So, but still, there is one common theme is the growth. All countries are looking forward to growth, which is less so in European or US will say area where people are reasonably reached a certain level, and naturally they would like to maintain, and some growth has to be maintained. But in our case, the growth factor is much larger, and it may appear to them then that our emissions are rising and theirs are falling, but at the same time we always point out their levels are high, so even if they are falling. And plus, when you look at the burden that is global burden that we created over time in cumulated emissions, that is also very large. And in fact, we calculated that even if India goes 2015 to 2050, we will not be emitting as much as they've already emitted since 1990, because we don't consider 1850. People, they argue it's bygone is bygones and so on. So, okay, but after 1990, we should consider it. So that's the basically international negotiation narratives that some of them may emerge. And one of the most other important things that tie all of us is the sustainable development goals, and how to promote climate change at the same time. And where are the synergies and where are the confrontation between the two? Some of them are synergistic, but some are not. So how do we maintain these two big challenges that this region, Asia, faces? So I'm looking forward to discussions today, and thank you very much to my colleagues for organizing this, but most of all the people for participating it. And I'm glad Dr. Anindya Chatterjee is here from Indian IDRC office, because IDRC has supported much of our work on also heat stress and also this particular conference they are supporting. We are also grateful to all the co-chair, Vinod Menon, J.R. Bhatt, Kirit Parikh, and we hope that Suresh Prabhu will join very soon. We also have a number of panelists from the region, Asia region, but right now they are much more from closer to us, South Asia. But over the time, we hope that we could expand this to include more regions, to include concerns of Asia Pacific in particular, and enlarge the discussion. So thank you very much for all of you for being here, and I'm looking forward to a very challenging for with full of ideas. Thank you.
We now invite Dr. Anindya Chatterjee, Regional Director Asia, IDRC, to give his inaugural remarks, please, sir.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for your introduction. And I'll go straight to the task of the in the center, in the middle of the program. We have two large programs that deal with issues that are at the heart of today's discussion, and that are for these two programs are one we call Inclusive Clean Energy Transition Program. And this program is looking at how energy transition can be inclusive and how energy access translate into wider social benefits, how it promotes.
एक सेकंड होल्ड करें, सारे पागल बना रखा है यहाँ पे, फल वाला बोल रहा है।
So very broadly, that's the objective of program, Inclusive Clean Energy. And we have a track record of working on climate change adaptation for a while, and that we have a new program with the UK government where we are looking at, among other things, the issues of development in a changing climate scenario. So this program is assessing adequacy and effectiveness of our current measures, is looking at costs and benefits of climate action and inaction across society, designing adaptive measures to address differential and context-specific needs. As Professor Parikh was saying, that needs of the countries and areas, hotspots within countries are very different. So what are those? How do we address them? And implications of climate change for human mobility, migration, displacement, and all the rest of it. So both these programs are what we have committed to for the next 10 years. And at the beginning of this cycle, I thought it would be, we thought that it would be meaningful to partner with IRADe to have a conversation, open-ended conversation. And you already have a list of questions in the folder. I won't read them out. Have an open-ended South Asian regional conversation to see where we are at and where we have entry points and how we can organize ourselves. And it's, we partnered with IRADe on this because we have had also a very successful research program on action research program on a multi-city program on managing heat stress. And a number of products have come out of it, not only working with city governments, developing city action plans, but quite a bit on the public health aspects, working with public health professionals, medical professionals, health workers to improve the preparedness of the public health system. So we found that project very successful, and as Professor Parikh has already outlined, IRADe at 20, quite young, its priorities, and so we are like-minded in a way. Our priorities are similar, and we always partner with think tanks to co-convene conversations. So I'm looking forward to the conversations today. We have a star-studded panel, so I'll be in a listening mode. And again, thank you, IRADe, thank you, Professor Parikh, thank you, Rohit, and all of you for co-convening this with us. And I look forward to the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Anindya Chatterjee, for your inaugural remarks. We now move on to our first session on climate resilient development in Asia region. This session will be chaired by Professor N. Vinod Chandra Menon, founder member, National Disaster Management Authority, India. I now request session chair to kindly continue with the session.
Can we can see them this slide? Yeah, that's true. Because we can see.
Thank you very much. I am very grateful to IRADe and also to IDRC, Professor Jyoti Parikh and Dr. Anindya Chatterjee of IDRC, the Regional Director Asia, for giving me this opportunity to chair this session. This regional consultation is very important, and the topic which has been selected is also very relevant. We are looking at the climate resilient, low carbon and inclusive growth in Asia. And specifically, I think strengthening the climate resilient, low carbon and inclusive growth in the Asian countries is actually very challenging, because we know that hydrometeorological disasters are actually challenging the development process of the countries in Asia and Asia Pacific region, specifically South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia. We have a lot of hydrometeorological disasters which are recurring almost every year. Right now, while we're talking, we're having the floods in Assam and Bihar in India, and also in the neighboring countries, we are facing this. So I think this topic is very relevant. And when we're looking at the climate resilient, low carbon and inclusive growth, I feel that we would need to take the communities as central to this dialogue, to this conversation, the stakeholder groups as central to this conversation, very important. And so we have a very distinguished panel, who will actually be participating in the plenary session. And I would request, the distinguished panelists to speak specifically with reference to the regional priorities and also to the national priorities from their national context. And also, what are which are the potential force multipliers whom you recognize in the region? Because I think, we need to identify the force multipliers in the region, institutions, think tanks, climate activists, climate change work, disaster risk reduction, people working on smart cities, people working on smart mobility, smart housing, green housing, and also on energy efficiency, energy security, water security, food security, and many other issues. So I am very happy that this regional consultation is happening. And I have a very long association with IDRC. In fact, almost in the 1980s, in the Systems Research Institute in Pune with Professor J.G. Krishnaiah, there was an information center on development policy modeling, which was funded by IDRC Canada. And I happened to work in that during the formative years of my professional life. And I'm very happy that we have this opportunity of interacting with IDRC, and also look forward to continued association. I would now request the panelist, from Bangladesh, Professor Mizan Khan, if he's joined. May I request him to initiate? Yes, thank you. We would like to have the panelists speak for about 5 minutes each, 7 minutes maximum, and then we can have about 15 minutes for an open house discussion and response to questions and answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Vinod. Yeah, first let me share some of the developments that in Bangladesh we are having. You all know that Bangladesh is having for the last few years, in fact, for the last 2 to 3 decades, robust growth of 6 to 7%, as a result of which Bangladesh is on the doorstep of graduating out of the LDC status. But for economic growth, and government has got a huge social protection programs too. But for Bangladesh, our greatest challenge is about environmental sustainability. Because a country 65 times smaller than America, but housing about exactly half of its population is surviving. If there is no floods or cyclones or natural disasters, we don't need to improve food, for example. But since independence, Bangladesh government has put great emphasis on agriculture development. That is why in Bangladesh we have a tremendous success in agricultural development and also many innovative systems like saline tolerant and flood tolerant varieties and all those. But our one challenge is that because of the industrial and infrastructure development, paddy land is going down and down. But at the same time, dependence on rice also is going down. because food diversification is happening with people's income, and the middle income group are also eating other than pure rice. Is something positive in the case of Bangladesh. Historically, in terms of disaster management, Bangladesh had been a model because we had been an extremely disaster-prone country. And based on our experiential learning, we did build a robust system with huge community mobilization. 76,000 volunteers we have on a standby in case of anything happens then. And that also helped us kind of to address our adaptation issues. Bangladesh also is regarded as kind of a growing model in adaptation, which is a little paradoxical in the sense that in such a small country, so environmental climate change bettered a nation, but still our casualties, for example, are extremely low compared to other even developed countries. Now, our total asset, for example, loss and damage happens more in absolute terms, but loss of lives are going down and down. This is another aspect. In terms of renewable energy, low carbon development, Bangladesh emits about 1/3 of 1% of global emissions. So we are not a big emitter, but certainly emission is going per capita as well as in absolute terms. And this will continue for some years, certainly. But I believe that personally, there are lots of win-win options, even to reduce emissions through energy efficiency, energy conservation, etc., where we need to invest much more than we are currently doing. Bangladesh has developed the new Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan, which has focused on renewable energy. Still, our share in the energy mix is about quite low, about 3 to 4%, though Bangladesh feels proud of having more than 6 million solar home systems. But that does not add much to the national grid, Our national solar system is not well connected to the solar grid system. This is one thing. Another area for low carbon development in Bangladesh, I think we have clean cooking stove program, which is good, well developed, but still we have about 25 million households where there is a space for clean cooking system. Once we can introduce, then emission at the individual household level will go down. Another area that I will mention about in Bangladesh, Bangladesh kind of a Dhaka-centric country. Unlike India, for example, you have a big country, so you have many regional capitals and all those. So we are trying to develop a climate resilient, migrant-friendly towns. This is the model that we have published an opinion piece in Science magazine last year, where we have elaborated on this model to divert the inflow of climate refugees away from Dhaka and other big cities. So this climate resilient migrant-friendly towns where I think we can have regional cooperation. India, you have witnessed and experienced so strong heat waves, unprecedented in history. So urban regional development resilience, we need to work together with India and other South Asian countries. And then migration is a factor in South Asian context because climate displacement is happening, but I think internal regional migration is not much. To me, if migrants flow to India, India is used kind of an entrepot as a transit to go somewhere else because our income level are not different nowadays much. So at the regional level, we need to discuss this more openly because there are global outfits which don't have concrete steps except for research, better understanding and all those, including the latest global compact on migration. Here, this is one area where we regionally, we need to discuss with an open mind. Another area I think for regional cooperation, which we will need, is in South Asia, specifically, there has been primacy of the political and security considerations in regional cooperation. But all countries in South Asia are low-income countries. So this is something, as a civil society, as a university professor, but a government negotiator for the last 20 years, I find this is kind of a misplaced priority in South Asia. That is why in South Asia, we have focused more historically on sharing of the existing resources, not investments and initiatives are focused on shared development, joint development of those resources. Once we can jointly develop, then we can share better. But that initiatives still are not there. We can have better regional electricity grid, which is not still there. We must have multilateral water sharing arrangement, which still we don't have. Here I will put the main onus on India as the regional power. So I think this is what I wanted to share. Given time, I will come back when needed. Thank you very much, and when you will allow. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Professor Misan Khan. I think you have really introduced several topics which are extremely thought-provoking, and I'm sure that all the other distinguished delegates and the other panelists would also respond to some of these. Co-benefits are very important, and Bangladesh has been in the forefront of the cyclone protection program, which has been done by Bangladesh, from 500,000 casualties in 1970s in the Cox's Bazar cyclone to 121, and now to almost double digits. I think is a remarkable progress in Bangladesh. So also you are having a lot of climate change negotiators like Salimul Haq and many others, including yourself, and many others who've been really taking this forward. So I would like to now request Professor Ram Manohar Shrestha from Thailand, if he's there, who kindly initiate his presentation. I'm not sure whether he's joined. Then we could move to Mr. Jagan Shah, of the director of the Artha Center for Emerging Cities, if he's there. Hello.
Move on to Ms. Ramona Miranda, Steering Committee Member, Duryog Nivaran, Sri Lanka, please.
Yes, Ms. Ramona Miranda, Duryog Nivaran, Sri Lanka, may I request you to kindly initiate your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Professor Menon, and thank you to all the organizers for inviting me to make a few observations. So today, I'm going to pitch straight in the interest of time, but the angle that I'm going to come into this from is looking at the inclusion aspect. So I will leave the details from Sri Lanka to Dr. Sugatapala, who will be talking in the next session. But I'm going to concentrate on inclusion, as this is something that in Duryog Nivaran in recent years we've been working quite a bit on in the Asia Pacific region, of course with a focus on South Asia, and looking at it as an important aspect of climate resilience development. So one of the things, I think one of the main sort of key aspects, when we take development, I'm just going to sort of the whole sort of definition of things and things like that as to why inclusion, and specifically gender inclusion, is an important aspect. So development is improvement in a country's economic and social conditions and managing natural and human resources to create wealth and improve people's lives. You all know that. Sustainable development is the act of balancing three aspects: the economy, the society, and the environment, and each intersect with each other. And when we come to climate resilient development, we're talking about the urgency and the complexity of climate change crisis, requiring the actions in balancing these three aspects at a new depth and scale. So in that context, we are also looking at few like the importance of risk-informed sustainable development. So we know that disasters, of course, we have been primarily working on in the disaster risk reduction space, and with it now intersect, basically overlapping and intersecting with, as well as merging with the whole sort of climate resilience actions. So my angle might tend to be, I might tend to focus on the DRR angle rather than the whole climate resilience angle. So forgive me for that. So disasters erode the gains of development is one thing that we've kind of seen. I have a few slides, but I'm not going to share those. I'm just talking of those. And deficits in development create risks of disasters. So on one hand. On the other hand, development creates new risks of disasters that compound the existing layers of risk. And then when you add the increased climate risk, you have the vulnerability and injustices are exacerbated even further and can undermine all the efforts to achieve, sustainable development. So when we look at sustainable development again, there are three universal principles. We have the human rights-based approach, where the plans, policies, processes of development are anchored in a system and corresponding obligations. We have the whole principle of leaving no one behind. The central transformative promise of the 2030 agenda requires combating discrimination and rising inequalities within and amongst countries and their root causes. And then we have the whole principle of gender equality and women's empowerment, shaping attitudes, women's decisions that endorse an equitable distribution of resources among men and women, girls and boys, and that gender equality makes development stronger and resilient, more resilient. So there are so many international frameworks. We have the CEDAW, we have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against the Women as the foundation to gender equality and women's empowerment, and all the global agreements and guidance frameworks of 2015-2016. You have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. You have the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. You have the Paris Agreement. You have the Agenda for Humanity 2016, Addis Ababa Action Agenda, New Urban Agenda. All of these have very strong statements, strong thinking, and strong aspects of inclusion, especially gender responsive aspects in the whole process. So, for example, in the Paris Agreement, the party, there's acknowledgement that adaptation, including capacity building for mitigation and adaptation action, should be gender responsive, participatory, fully transparent, taking into consideration vulnerable groups or at-risk groups, communities, and ecosystems. The Sendai Framework, very similarly, women and their participation are critical to effectively managing risk and designing, resourcing, and implementing risk reduction policies, plans, and programs. And adequate capacity building measures are needed. And all of that. So the trends that we have seen, that when we started, the discussion started with disaster vulnerability shift from women's and gender perspective. Now it includes diverse populations. We're not only talking about women, we're talking about all at-risk groups. The emphasis has also shifted to empowerment and capacity, whereas earlier on we used to focus on vulnerability and disaster victims. For instance, we take the Bangladesh cyclone example. You saw how the women and a lot of the volunteers being women, have made a huge difference there. Change in approach to risk reduction and resilience building with emphasis on participation, engagement, and empowerment, and also whole rights-based approach to climate and disaster risk exposure, access to early warning, recovery, and the whole works. So basically, the way forward, at least having carried out a recent review together with some other organizations in the Asia Pacific region, one of the things that we kind of saw that if you look at gender responsive risk reduction or gender responsive resilience building in and by itself, it's not going to really achieve much. It becomes under the whole umbrella of empowering women per se, and empowering women comes between the whole aspect of mainstream development. So we can't take one little aspect and try to deal with it separately. Of course, we saw a whole lot of, impacts of COVID. I'm not going into that. But it also did highlight how some of the pre-existing disparities, gender disparities, made things even worse for groups at risk. So some of the key observations that I want to end with is that gender equality and social inclusion in resilience building is an extension of the overall status of gender equality and women's empowerment in a society. We make commitments in the national risk reduction strategies and action plans for gender equality and social inclusion. However, a lot of the time we put the sole responsibility for implementation on the DRM or the climate change focal institutions. And this might be unrealistic. This is what we found in our review across Asia Pacific, that it's not their sole responsibility because it's not a separate thing. Gender inclusion is not a separate thing. Climate and disaster resilience is not a separate thing from development. Therefore, you need all of government coming together. So therefore, there's a need for greater clarity on roles and responsibilities, the core mandate expectations of the DRM and the climate change focal institutions, as well as the responsibility of the national and provincial development planning institutions, women's ministries, and all of government basically, into the effective realization of the outcomes of the 2030 agendas. We also need government at the various levels to ensure documentation of disaggregated data from, sex, age, disability, and whatever other ways you can disaggregate of service provider and right holders details like type of need, type of disabilities, various aspects for all sorts of groups. And this is important because increasingly we are looking at handling or building resilience from an intersectionality point of view as well. Social protection nets have to be strengthened. Especially we saw in recent times, with COVID, we saw how informal workers, especially women workers, were really hit bad. But if we have social protection nets, the resilience will be built and enabling them to face various extreme events much better. So way forward in post-disaster. Sorry, I think my time is up. Yes.
Basically, we can come back after,
Yeah, basically development planning, just a last sentence, the development planning needs to be risk informed and inclusive. I'll just conclude with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think, the issue of linking economy, ecology, and society is very important. And, we need to really see how we will be able to mainstream many of these, issues which are actually really challenging, because whether it is a question of, whether it is a question of, looking at risk profiles, vulnerability profiles, and exposure profiles of communities at risk, in Asia, I think inclusive growth becomes extremely important. And in many ways, vulnerability reduction and capacity building go very closely. So what you mentioned about gender equality and women's empowerment and social inclusion is very, very important. And I'm sure that there will be many questions which will come up and we'll come back to you. May I now request Ms. Bijal Brahmabhat of the Mahila Housing Trust in India to kindly make her intervention. Thank you. Ms. Bijal.
Sorry, I was just unmuting.
Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Bijal Brahmbhatt and I represent the Mahila Housing Trust from India. And we are actually working with poor women in informal sector, trying to improve their housing, living and working environment since the last 27 years. And we started working on access to electricity issues way back in 2000. But we started working on climate resilience, mitigation and adaptation angle since 2015, because at least in urban areas, we understood that the negative impacts of climate change are going to be multiplied because of the kind of built environment that we are generating. We started working with poor women. So it's a poor women-led model of climate resilience, which is being deployed around across 3 countries, actually, India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. We worked in 5 cities, currently working in 5 cities in India. As MHT, we are working in much more, but on the climate change, we are working in 5 cities. And then, of course, Kathmandu and Dhaka in Bangladesh. So the model is, so when we started talking about climate change to poor women, it was nowhere on their agenda. It was merely God's act. Yeah, they were saying that heat is increasing. They were also saying that there are untimely rains, and in a very hot area like Ahmedabad, there are hailstorms, but it's all God's act. They were not interested in something like, because the climate change terminology is disasters, meaning shocks, and then long-term but slow but potent, disasters like heat stress or probably air pollution or water stress. And that was very abstract for them when their concentration was on realizing short-term needs like fees for children education, or where will I get my today's, meal, etc. And so for them, it was very, sort of long-term and abstract. And the only, and when we say, but they were very clear on one thing, they did not want their children to live the kind of lives that they were leading. And when we said it may become even worse because of climate change, they were really ready to work on these issues with us. And also because we had a long-term engagement, where we were helping them to get water, access to water or access to electricity initially. So it was a longer-term relationship. So our model began with extensive, communication on what is climate change and, gamification, etc., just to induce behavior change. So it was basically divided into introduction to climate change, then probably, helping them, making their own vulnerability assessments in the areas of heat, water, air pollution, flooding, vector-borne disease are some of the initial ones that we took. And then, of course, coming up with their action plans. Also, community level surveillance mechanisms like, testing of water quality every time there is monsoon, or developing monsoon action plans. So one was extensive behavior change communication. The second was which was very interesting, was that we were also piloting technologies into these poor households and trying to set up disruptive collaborations between technologists and scientists, so, and the city and poor. So for example, we were deploying cool roof technologies in their housing, and they were trained to read the temperature loggers to note the temperature after the cool roof was installed, compare it with the IMD, and then if they were convinced, they would give feedbacks to the technologists to, sort of make the roof in a way. For example, one of the technology, the roof had, it was very effective, but it had corrugations, and therefore they could not use it as a terrace. And then they gave the feedback to the technologies that while we may buy it, we would like to use it like a terrace, so make it flat. So then the technologists went back and did that. And, so then we started giving finance for such solutions which could be upscaled. So by the way, we are also now currently starting to work on heat insurance and flood insurance in urban areas and led by poor women. So that has just started based on our past work, which has now almost reached through these community action groups that we have trained 200,000, poor families. So we and the last approach was that then they started formulating multi-stakeholder groups with these scientists, technologists, the cities and themselves to meet regularly and start influencing policies. So for example, they were very critical in implementing the heat action plan in the city of Ahmedabad, where later on the heat action plan was only focusing on health agenda. And later on, a cool roof policy was also introduced by these poor women. For example, they are also now having monsoon action plans with the cities and are getting implemented. So this was a model that we tried to, and we did transfer it to urban areas in Nepal and Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, primarily Dhaka. At that point in time, we were working with ICAT too. And so we understood that it could be transferred to about 190 million poor in the informal settlements who are found across the global south. Now, some of the key issues that we also realized is that climate change by itself, as ma'am was saying, cannot stand in urban areas. It has to interact and intersect with master planning, with city level plans, ward level planning, as it is desired in the 74th Amendment, because that is going to churn out how the development is going to happen in cities. So I think these kind of multi-sectoral, multi-level intersection with the development of the city is very, very crucial. I think the second thing that we also started working on, because we realized that with such a big housing program happening in India, and the poor moving from slums to affordable housing, they were almost tripling their energy usage for two reasons. One is aspiration, and secondly, because the housing which was being churned was not provided, was very hot. And the issue is that we do have an ECBC code, but the code is not applicable to residential housing below 250 square meters. So some of it probably I or you will also not have in urban areas. So how do we apply it to the poor affordable housing? And the catch here is that the costs should not increase by 5 to 7%. Otherwise, the two ministries may not talk to each other. So we have not exactly come up with an energy conservation code, but we have come up with passive design suggestions, material suggestions. We've worked with CEPT University and come up with passive design and material suggestions to be applied across India in the Housing for All program, so that heat is reduced, thermal comfort is increased, and therefore energy consumption is also reduced. So that's one area that we have been working on. The other point that I would like to emphasize on is that most of our cities, as all of us already know, are using groundwater to a great extent. And so the day zero is going to be very near as predicted by the Jal Shakti Ministry. But one must also realize that in a big city like Delhi, 40% of the energy usage is for pumping out water from the ground. So there is a very big energy, water, heat nexus happening in our cities. And, while the poor may generate the least, they will be impacted the most. So how do you really involve them? And this is how we have been trying, because climate action plans, state level climate action plans in isolation of master planning and ward level planning in cities is never going to work. So how do you make them intersect along with the poor, with the women, is some of the key questions that we have been trying to look at. And also, I think what is very, very important is that the poor also need to be, informed or, about scientific thinking approach. For example, when we were talking of water stress, we mapped the entire water cycle and introduced a game to them in a gamification manner so that they understood the systems thinking approach. Now, when we do this, recurrently with the poor, they are able to sit at the same table, collect evidence, micro level data, and talk to city governments and technologists to, I think, undertake pro-poor, pro-women, climate-friendly development in urban areas. And I think that is what is required today. And, there are multiple issues like heat, water stress, air pollution, flooding, vector-borne disease. And I think the crux that we have found, at least to include the poor, is formulating this kind of community action groups, which have direct access to communities and layering them on existing activities. Because we layered climate change on access to water or access to toilet or access to a house, rather than only talking about it in isolation. And that is what really worked with the poor for us. So these are some of our key findings.
Vijal,
Yeah.
I think, you raised some very important issues in terms of the linkages between energy, water, and also, you mentioned the heat waves which are happening in terms of the linkages between, the energy, water, and groundwater extraction, which is actually happening in many cities. These are all very closely interrelated to climate change and climate action. And you also mentioned the need for citizen science and gamification and getting the poor people, the poor household. And what Professor Misan Khan was talking about, 25 million households who may need to also look at, energy efficient cooking. And, so these are all related issues. And I'm sure that we will come back to it in the open house. There will be many questions. So now, thank you very much. Can we, and also want to mention that Ms. Vijal Brahmbhatt and the Housing Trust has also been awarded globally for the work which they were doing in the Sasakawa Award for, disaster risk reduction in the UNDRR. Thank you very much for your interventions. And may I now request Mr. Shashikant Chopte of ISET to make his intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Menon. And at the outset, let me thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. I represent ISET, Institute for Social and Environmental Transition International, which is a US-based organization and has been working in the region South Asia, Southeast Asia since early part of this century, 2000, 2001 almost. And we were, in fact, I think one of the few, we were one of the first few, regional project implementing agencies on adaptation that was supported by IDRC. And we had a regional presence. We have ISET Nepal as our sister organization. We also subsequently worked on after the regional adaptation project, we worked on Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network program. That was again a regional program looking at urban resilience. Then we associated with Climate Development Knowledge Network (CDKN) mainstreaming program, where actually we looked at various disaster hazards, hazard context, diverse hazard context, floods, cyclones, etc. And then broadly, we've actually been working across, for promoting resilience across various socioeconomic transitions, be it rural or peri-urban or urban, and also across various diverse, hazard contexts, floods, droughts, heat waves, and also the coastal hazards, including cyclones and flooding. So, as part of the overall work, I would actually pick up a few areas which actually we furthered, and I would like to talk about them in my presentation. So, one of the areas is mainstreaming. We also did work, as I said, on evaluating cost benefit analysis, which involved climate projections and probabilistic analysis. So as you know, cost benefit analysis is very much required for project development, understanding the returns to investments. We demonstrated how it can be done using by involving climate projections, including climate projections, and doing a probabilistic details statistical probabilistic analysis. We also have been working on resilient livelihoods and more recently on urban resilience. So coming to the key points I flag from my own experience in India, there are a few major points that need to be addressed when we are talking about resilient development. We have fairly good capacities at the national level, be it the National Disaster Management Authority, the plans we have, National Disaster Management Plan, policies, and at the lower level, when we go down, there are the State Disaster Management Plan and further lower District Disaster Management Plans. In the another parallel, that is the climate parallel, we have National NAPCC, SAPCC similarly. So we have a wide range of plans, guidelines, project, the instruments for promoting resilience. But what is required is basically how do we mainstream this whole what has been talked, what is being promoted or supported or promoted through various instruments, the resilience concept or resilient practice, how it can be implemented by agencies at the state and lower levels. So the capacity, there is a clear capacity gap at the lower levels, who are actually the ones who will be implementing the policies, guidelines, plans, etc. So we need to look at addressing how we can address how we can strengthen the implementation capacities of state and lower level agencies, authorities, and departments. Especially when we come to capacity issues, the capacity to assess risk. By, for example, a department, if a project has to be developed, risk needs to be assessed adequately, including using the climate, future scenarios. So the question to ask is, do the departments have capacity to conduct risk assessment using, climate projections, future scenarios? And do the departments have, or the agencies have, capacities to integrate risk in their planning? So we need to develop some tools which can actually aid these project developers and implementers develop and implement and monitor projects that integrate resilience in an effective way. Another part of capacity is interpreting climate projections. As you know, climate projections, there's an issue of scale. The information required, or the projection information required at a particular scale, for example, city scale, is seldom not available. So there's a mismatch in the scale. Sorry, is seldom available. So there's mismatch of scale of availability of climate projections and the need, where actually at which scale it is required. And also the analyzed products are not, tailored properly. For example, the projections analysis talks about percentage, millimeter increase in millimeter of rainfall. So for example, municipal commissioner, that doesn't convey much in terms of how it is going to translate into flood frequencies or flood intensities, durations, and frequencies. So if those climate projections can be tailored into products, tools that can help the policy and decision makers take informed decisions to incorporate resilience in their planning, would be a great help in the direction. Third point related to capacity is on, these words, resilience, adaptation are very, very, heavily loaded words. We need to unpack them in, practical terms, how they can be translated into, any departments, for example, annual planning, how they can be used for, how resilience adaptation concepts can be used for prioritizing sectoral actions, and putting in place appropriate budgeting system. So there is an again need for a suite of tools and methods to be developed that can unpack this complex terminologies like resilience and adaptation, and help the departments or the corporations to do meaningful planning and implementation to integrate resilience in their day-to-day operations or annual programs. One of the second last point I'll make is, again, it's on capacity, but indirectly related to capacity. We need to develop norms, standards, codes for resilient infrastructure. For that, we'll also need to promote a different approach to way infrastructure is developed and implemented. A resilient infrastructure might require higher upfront investment as compared to usual investments in infrastructure that are going, in which case operational maintenance generally is not taken care of adequately. So there will be there will be some trade-offs, but in the long run or over the life of the infrastructure, it becomes a beneficial approach. It gives a positive internal rate of returns. So there is a need for developing capacity. While the norms, standards, codes can be developed, but there is a need to develop capacities to make the decision makers or the project developers understand the importance of investing in resilience, and how it pays back. So it's an issue of awareness, capacity, and also related tools need to be developed.
Yeah, Shashikant, now may I request you to kindly conclude, because
yeah, I'll just make a last point. Sorry.
Right.
On the finance part, there are products that exist in the home and life insurance sector, or even, for example, car insurance we have, agriculture crop insurance we have, but insurance for public infrastructure and assets need to be promoted, and we need to have it on start off on a pilot basis and then see how it can be scaled up. We have state disaster mitigation fund put in place, but clarity is needed on what actions are included in the mitigation domain, so that the departments can develop projects accordingly. So these were my submissions.
Thank you very much. I think we can now open it up as an open house for the delegates to ask questions in case they have any questions or queries or even comments. Because we have very distinguished delegates attending the regional consultation, and so I may request anybody who has any questions, comments, or even suggestions on the climate resilient development processes in Asia, please introduce yourself and speak. Thank you. If you have any questions to any of the speakers, you can address the questions to the speakers or to the organizers, to Professor Jyoti Parikh or Dr. Anindya Chatterjee, or the organizers. Please feel free. We have another 10-15 minutes. And if there are any questions or comments, or we can request the panelists to give their 1-minute interventions if the questions are not forthcoming. Professor Misan Khan.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, good evening. My name is Hemavati. I'm 28 years old. I'm the founder of Enact Earth Foundation. It's an NGO working on creating a climate literate society. It's less than a year old. I'm also a PhD scholar at Terry School of Advanced Studies. This is a general question to, I think, all panelists in terms of the kind of conversations we are having around climate resilience itself. Because I feel that when we talk about climate resilience, we are always extremely optimistic, feeling that our conversations and attempts in developing resilience, irrespective of whoever is the stakeholder, that we will succeed. Why I feel it's also, I just want to ask the panel as to why do you think there is no conversations on what if we fail to become resilient, especially in the case of loss and damage. I understand Professor Mizan had mentioned about loss and damage, but our conversations are always so optimistic and we fail to be more prepared for the loss and damage that happens when we fail to become more resilient. Why is that conversation absent, or why are we not bringing in such a perspective is what I'd like to know from the panelists. Thank you.
Professor Mizan, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah. In fact, resilience, this expression came from biology, you know, and in climate change parlance, we get to understand by resilience, not just bouncing back to its previous state, but bouncing back better, build forward better. In that sense, we use climate resilience. It's something that captures many of the things, but very difficult to operationalize. You know, better with the development of better adaptive capacity, only we can build better resilience. And Professor Parikh has mentioned about the knowledge management. Yeah, capacity building, including universities, also is extremely important, because when the citizens, common citizens, have got better climate and environmental literacy, they can do miracles, you know, once they understand the problem. If you know the problem, then there is not much risk, you know. So this is what we need, region-wide. We need to have massive development of capacities. And I myself serve as the technical lead of the LDC Universities Consortium on Climate Change, which is an official program of the 46 LDC governments, where our purpose is to build capacity in the LDC societies led by the universities, which are the most sustainable institutions in these countries. So this is what I wanted to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Ramona, any response from your side?
Response to the question, that's actually quite a difficult one, because that's true. I mean, if the stakeholders, if we fail, what do we do? I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. All we know is that one of the things that I was going to say in my sort of 1 minute, that we need to actually keep telling not just our communities, but we also the development planners on the importance on this whole our country's, you know, vulnerabilities to the climate change, that we need actions, we need to do that, and we have to believe that we can make imprint on people that action needs to be taken. I was listening to something yesterday on sort of the Sri Lankan economic situation and the whole thing about, okay, can we, someone asked the question, can we achieve the development goals? I mean, we can't, I don't know whether we can sit back and say, we can't. I mean, it's difficult, but we still have to believe that we can get there. Do we have to be prepared if we don't get there? Yes, I guess so. But let's first keep trying while we also do the latter. So that's my response. And do I take this time to also wrap up, or do I get a chance later to give my two comments?
I do wanted, this is Bijal, I do wanted to speak something on this.
Yes, please.
I think, yeah, all of us understand, although, is that, those who generate the most emissions or the most climate damage are least going to be affected because they are the rich and the developed. And so this is an issue of, and the most poor, even if the poorer countries, whether it's the poorer countries or whether it's the poor in the poorer countries, they are all going to suffer the most. So I think loss and damage also needs great political will. Discussion on loss and damage needs great political will, because all those who are doing much loss and damage may not necessarily get impacted. But I have seen that in the last COP, I think the developing countries or the least developed countries have been pushing on this agenda of loss and damage. And let's be more hopeful on that.
Thank you. Actually, there is also a comment in the chat box from Dr. Mani Nepal talking about informing and providing a link to the book Climate Change and Community Resilience Insights from South Asia. I hope all of you would kindly take a look at that document. Many of the issues which are presented by the panelists are very important. We need to really look at risk-informed planning. Basically emphasize multi-stakeholder engagement, local communities who are facing the risk of disasters, climate change-induced hydrometeorological disasters, and also extreme events. Issues like heat waves and the droughts, landslides. And right now, while we're talking, we have been listening to the discussions about a landslide in Manipur, which is actually already about 40 people have lost their lives and about 70 people have been trapped in the landslide. We have about 5.5 million people affected by the floods in Assam. So I think when you're looking at climate resilient development and climate resilient and inclusive development and low carbon economy, we need to really bring in these kind of solutions. Climate change adaptation is important. Climate change, mitigation is important. We need to really look at many of the solutions which have been discussed in the smart cities, and also using mobile applications, using information technology solutions and platforms, which we have seen providing a lot of insights on disaggregated data, sharing on even transboundary issues. I think these are all important, and we need to work together through a regional collaborative kind of framework. And I hope that with IRADe and with IDRC, we should be able to see that working together, like what Professor Misan Khan mentioned, we need to really have that kind of an opportunity where it has to be a collective responsibility and a multi-stakeholder engagement in using citizen science and even crowdsourced solutions. We have seen the success of crowdsourced solutions during the COVID-19 pandemic across the world. So I would like to thank the organizers, IRADe and IDRC Canada, the regional office in Delhi for Asia, Dr. Anindya Chatterjee and Professor Jyoti Parikh, and also
Dr. Vinod Menon and all the panelists who have contributed a great deal. What we understand is also that Asia has many common attributes such as culture, our democratic traditions, high population, poverty, not all countries, but many. Weather and temperature ranges are also similar. And so there is much to learn from each other. We have large coastal regions and therefore vulnerable fishing and agriculture. Our consumption is low, SDG challenges are there. So there are many things in common. So when we come to the question of being pessimistic. I think it's a matter of learning from each other also. Over the time, we have learned a lot. For example, though it's not climate change, but even that happens in cyclone. In earthquake, 10,000 people died in Latur, but now hundreds would be considered a big number. And so we have to try to understand and accept it, yet how to respond to it in a more effective way is something we are learning from each other. And when one country fails into another, somebody has succeeded. And so we try to see and learning from each other. We are also looking at, when it comes to mitigation, issues of co-benefit sharing with other objectives like clean energy transition or also reducing our fuel import bill and so on. So that way we minimize our costs for addressing the mitigation issues. And as Professor Menon pointed out, economy, ecology, society, these are all interlinked issues. And the more we work, more we realize that there are no silos of any kind. So with this concluding comment, we can move to the mitigation session, which is chaired by Professor Kirit Parikh and also co-chaired by, he is the chairman IRADe and a former member of Planning Commission. Dr. J.R. Bhatt is a government appointee for APAN and senior advisor, Ministry of Environment and Forest, and long-time supporter of IRADe. I am very happy to welcome him to the dais. Oh, I'm glad to see. So, Honorable Shri Prabhu has also joined us. You all know he was one of the first minister for environment. He started his career with that, and then he has done many. He has been a minister for many ministries, including power, commerce, railways, and whatnot. Also, water task forces and so on. So he is the right person to address us on this occasion. We welcome you with heart. Thank you.
Since Mr. Prabhu has other engagements, and if you've just seen how many engagements he has during a year, you would not be surprised that he is. You'll be really grateful that he even found this much time. So I request him to give his speech right away first.
So thank you very much for inviting me for such an important consultation. I thank my dear friend, Dr. Kirit Parikh, and of course, Mrs. Parikh and Mr. J.R. Bhatt for putting together such a distinguished group of people whose views on this matter will certainly enhance the value of not just deliberation, but hopefully the outcome as well, which will lead to some very actionable policy measures that will be taken in the region. I was just going through this very interestingly. What are the 4 points on which you are discussing? And I was saying, as Dr. Kirit Parikh was saying, that I have been doing so many things in the afternoon or in the morning actually. We had a very long discussion on this is the 100th cooperative year that is being celebrated. So we had a very big event in Vigyan Bhavan, chaired by the Minister of Cooperation, Amit Shah. And I was giving the keynote address. So I spoke for almost 40 minutes. And I was talking about some of these issues. And that's why it was fresh on my mind as to how the global challenges that we are facing today, because this was 100 years of cooperatives. How could cooperatives deal with those. And I was saying, as we always know, that climate change and response to that, whether it's adaptation, mitigation, resilience, all these issues, can be dealt at various levels. One, always people can say who don't want to take any action will say it's a global problem. So let it be done at global level. So no action is required because global is required. Like there was a time when people are saying that corruption is a global phenomenon. That means we don't have to do anything on it. It's a global phenomenon. What can we do about it? So I think it's a good idea to say climate change is a very important issue, but it's a global issue. So nobody has to do anything about it. But we fail to understand that if it's a global issue, where in the globe we are going to tackle it? Is there any place in the globe which has been identified as an action taken to be taken on climate change? So you go there, take into that space station, take action, and then climate change will be addressed. So all of that has to happen finally at somewhere or the other in the world. And that's a local action that will be cumulatively add to either emissions or reduction of it. So the local action that is required, and I was saying that the cooperatives are the best suited to that. We've got almost more than 500,000 cooperatives in India. Some of them are efficient, some of them are not so efficient. And in fact, that was one of my other part of my speech, which I was saying how to strengthen those cooperatives at a grassroots level. But just imagine if you work on a grassroots action through some form of organization, which can actually result into some concrete solution, and even concrete outcomes. So the climate resilience issue has to be tackled at many levels. Obviously, global action is also required. Others, how you calculate the total load of how much is in the atmosphere, the carbon and all the greenhouse gases, and how do you actually attempt to reduce it. So globally, obviously, somebody has to calculate the global load. But it can never happen that global action without local commensurate action. At the same time, only local and nothing global will not work. So we need at all levels. And when you say all levels, and that's why I'm very happy that you are discussing one region of it, that's Asia. Asia is actually the most populous region of the world. And as everybody says now, the future is Asia in terms of growth. So economic activity, as well as the people who actually will contribute through their own lifestyles to climate change, are going to be largest in number in Asia. Interestingly, if you really want to do the resilience part, I was just thinking just now, I was just thinking to myself that you'll be knowing that Asia is home to the largest number of religions were born in this Asia. Whether it's Christianity, Muslims, Judaism, Hinduism, Sikhism, or Jainism, whatever you call it. So most of them are born in this part of the world, in Asia. So maybe not the South Asia. Some of them are South Asia, but some maybe Southeast, the Middle East. But point is, the Abrahamic religions are born there. But point is, can we not use the power of religion to work on resilience? Because no religion says that go and destroy nature. But unfortunately, it's a religion which can have a positive impact on people's mindset, which is really necessary for changing the mindset of the people. And at the same time, not using them. So in fact, I remember, and my dear friend, senior friend, Dr. Jyoti Parikh was saying I was also environment minister. I remember when I was the Minister of Environment, I called all the religious leaders. So they were saying my secretary was really worried. He said, sir, it's going to be controversial. The religions is so religious. I said, what is the reality of life? The religions people follow. They go to churches, to mosques, to temples, to synagogue. They go all over the country, all over the world. So if you can view this to positive impact. So one of the reasons was I told them that biodiversity is what you all want to protect. But what is biodiversity? All the religious heads will say, my God has created this, what we call is biodiversity. My God, fine. So we accept everybody's God as a reality, and therefore they have created it. But then what right we get to destroy it when the Creator has created it? So we worship the Creator, and how can we destroy the creation? So actually it had some very good impact. I went to once to one of the most holiest place in Sikhism, Anandpur Sahib. Anandpur Sahib, the Jathedar, again gave me, along with Langar, he gave me a sapling. He said, आपने बोला था अभी हमने सब sapling लगाना शुरू कर दिया. So what I'm saying is the resilience part, if you want a proper response to come, you have to use institutions which are the capability of influencing people's mind. And that's why I talk about cooperatives, because that's a structural institution. It's a form of organization which can work on the ground. But cooperatives will not be as successful in changing the mindsets of people. We need something very much stronger than that. And therefore, I was saying in Asia, when you are discussing this region, can we not look at this? Anyway, that's a point just came to my mind because just you said you have been attending too many programs. I had to attend 3 more. So while we do this, Asia actually was always a weeping boy. People will say, that Europe is doing well, Americans are always trying the right thing. Asia is a problem. And now what has happened? The Europe, which was the champion of everything, Germany decided to move to coal. And so therefore, I think nobody should sit on a high moral pedestal and say that this is what should be done by others. We are doing everything right, but we are talking everything right. But are you doing everything right is a different matter. But now the whole world, the situation has changed dramatically. I was saying the other day when the war had just started, and when we decided, the Putin decided not to, or the Europeans also on the other side decided not to buy gas from Russia. I said Putin seems to be the best climate champion. Because of him, Europe will move towards renewables because the gas is not coming. But unfortunately, rather than moving to renewable, they have moved to coal. So it's worse than the disease. But now the challenge therefore is that Asia is going to be the hub of the activity from both, whether it is human-induced emissions because the human population is high, or whether it is energy use because it's the largest consumer of energy in the world, or also in terms of future infrastructure addition. Because despite the fact that Asia has some of the largest economies of the world are also in Asia. China is obviously the second largest, but Japan is also third, fourth largest. So I think the problem is now, therefore, how do you make Asia a center of probably better technology? So it's a good sign. You'll be surprised that on hydrogen, the best innovation that is happening is in Asia. The Japanese are working, because you can now say Japan is OECD country, but still Japan is in Asia geographically. So Japan and Korea both are doing some amazing work on storage as well as on new hydrogen, green as well as blue. Have good for both hydrogen, and therefore I think this is going to be a very interesting development that Asia is also innovating. It's not that nothing is happening, but now on resilience part, I think this is a real challenge for climate change globally. First, we are all in the right path till 2008 when the banks collapsed. And therefore, I was saying at that time that now the world attention is to save banks, not the planet. So they wanted to save the banks and forget the planet. But the same thing is happening again because of this Ukraine war. Now everybody is thinking about energy security from a different perspective, and therefore they are doing that. So Asia is going to be a hotbed of all these activities. And I think to do that, I think, as correctly pointed out in the point 2, adaptation is a real challenge, because when you say Asia is big continent, and therefore there is not homogeneity in this. Like you say, goes to the East Asia, Japan, Korea, there are different, China, different kinds of economies. If you go to the South Asia, one of the poorest of the world lives in. And ASEAN is exactly in between. ASEAN 10 has got very fine economies like Singapore, but also some poor people like in Indonesia. So I think we have a big challenge. And then if you go to a little bit away, in Middle East, there's a different challenge because the Middle East are producer of those gas. So adaptation part, we'll have to look at it into sub-regional basis rather than saying Asia as a whole. It's a completely different one. Asia is one continent, obviously, but completely different situations. It's not either, nothing similar in what you can see in Asia. So adaptation strategy will have to be completely different. Why? Whereas the South Asia has the biggest adaptation challenge because we get most of our water resources from Himalayas, and Himalaya is in real deep trouble. So adaptation to climate change in terms of water and agriculture is going to be a big issue in South Asia for sure. I think climate resilience through benefits of regional cooperation is absolutely necessary. In fact, we should talk about, when we talk about South-North cooperation, etc., etc. I was just now recently in Silicon Valley, and I was surprised the kind of research those people are doing. So people don't realize. So I think they're telling me the storage cost will be brought down, and that was in Silicon Valley. I was just about 3 weeks ago, and I had a very good, interesting meeting. So they are trying to do some phenomenal work. So while that is there in US, that's far away from us, even in some part of Asia, some phenomenal work is going. So how can you build cooperation between such companies? I was talking to the Japanese the other day, only when I was in Singapore a few days ago, and I was talking to them. So JERA, for example, which is, as you know, one of the top energy company in Asia for sure, they are doing some phenomenal work on both storage as well as hydrogen. So I think we can build cooperation with them. We should try to think about that. Of course, there is unfortunately no CDM. So how do we build these bridges is going to be very challenging. And I think COP26, we could not get that. So I think we should try to work on some ideas for regional cooperation in absence of such market-based mechanisms. And research capacity building, I think very important. And if it is gender sensitive, I'm very happy to see the gender sensitivity is quite good here. I think there are more women than men in the room. So I think that part is good. But I think that's another issue I was talking in the morning, that cooperatives have the ability to do gender justice in a big way. Like you come from Gujarat, Amul and Seva, that are two great. So Amul is of course Khera District Milk Federation. Amul is the brand name of the product. But both of them had done some phenomenal work in terms of women participating into economic activities on a massive scale. So I think we should involve for such gender issues, the cooperatives of that kind. And I'm just coming out of that, so I'm saying that's the best way to involve the women at a grassroots level who are affected by climate change. The agriculture is affected by climate change, that's why adaptation is necessary. Or even the milk production will be affected over a period of time. It is a different matter. People say the dairying is also responsible for the methane gas. So that's a different matter. But that is a different kind of dairying. So I think that's a different matter altogether. But I think we should work with cooperation with them. And therefore, I think I really would like to thank you for inviting me, because you wanted somebody who doesn't know anything should also come and speak about it, because you're all experts. So that's why I'm sure I have added value in terms of reducing the ability of discussion outcome. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think it was very wonderful.
Can we have a group photograph? It's a good time to do that. I think we have 60 people registered over there, but I'm sorry they can't be in this. But we thank you for that. or another. Those were already captured in the.
Professor, we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. We are together in Germany.
Right, yes, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we have chair and co-chair, like there on the left, and the are also there. Very fine to start.
Well, this is a very interesting topic in many ways. And climate change, as we've already learned, and we are learning every day, is a huge challenge and even bigger than what we had expected in many ways. And in that case, you think about resilience, we need to think about in a variety of ways. One can define it as a kind of some ability to withstand shocks with minimum damage to your goals of development, and your ability to get back into your trajectory of growth as you already had earlier. So that's the kind of understanding one should have of resilience. And I think your ability or resilience would depend on what preparedness you are to deal with the issues, to the shock. What are your resources? And resources of all kinds. It will be financial, technological, societal, which will consider the institutional, as Mr. Suresh Prabhu pointed out, organizations, cooperatives at the grassroots level, that becomes extremely critical. So your society's ability to organize itself, to take care of these shocks is really good. And if you talk about inclusive growth, you have to think about a growth that is really benefits all, and not just it. Hopefully, it removes poverty and deprivation. It's reduced, but all aspects of development, like you could say health, education, incomes, gender equity, and various uncertainty about the future. You're feeling your security about future is also important. So all this should be improved if you have an inclusive growth. And I think as we have seen, the intensity and severity of extreme events is increasing. And even newer types of extreme events we are seeing. For example, the huge heat waves that we had. I mean, though we know that heat shock is important, is an issue that we have been studying for a long time, IRADe. But the latest heat shock introduced a new element into the problem, that the wheat crop and other crops which are getting mature at the time, we lost a lot of yield in it. Something like 8-10% of loss in the yields of these things happen. So if you're talking about resilience and adaptation, in not only in the short term, which is what we have been discussing, but also long-term adaptation becomes very critical. And we know that climate change is going to change the pattern of hydrological distribution and intensity, but we also now have to worry about intensive and extreme heat events becomes also very critical. And this is not something that really affects only like cyclones. You could say, okay, it will be only coastal areas. But we found that cyclones are now coming to areas which had never earlier visited by cyclones. So it is important for all of us to get together to think about how we deal with this. And it does require indeed a cooperation and understanding of the issues, and also a kind of even resilience in resilience, because we need to have the kind of impacts, that newer impacts we are facing. We will need to see how are we going to deal with them is also important. So I think with these issues, I've asked Dr. Bhatt to say a few words, and Dr. Bhatt has been working in this area, climate change and so on, for many, many long years in the ministry. And so, Dr. Bhatt.
Thank you, Professor Parikh, and greetings to all of you, those who are physically present in the audience and those who have joined virtually. Greetings from MOEFCC and on my own behalf. The contextualization of the topic has been very aptly done by Mr. Suresh Prabhu, who was here, who graced the occasion for a while with us. He had given his important points, and the contextualization has also been done by Professor Parikh. So there is very little one can add, but yet there is a temptation to say something at an important event like this. We must always remember that global climate change is a global collective action problem. It cannot be solved by one single country, or by thinking that, if we take actions, the rest will also, and the problem will be solved. In this context, let us see what does the IPCC says. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Working Group 3 report, IPCC AR6 WG3, says very clearly that for entire South Asia, it's not just India, entire South Asia, the emissions are just around 4%. So the responsibility of causing the climate change is very minimal. And this is not what we would say based on, say, some databases which are floating around in the world, but this is what IPCC has assessed and has pointed out this year itself when it released its Working Group 3 report, that the responsibility for entire South Asia is just around 4%. Now, you might say that this 4% is, current, or is it per capita, or what it is. It is from, let me remind you that IPCC says that this is 1850 to 2090. So if you take the historical cumulative emissions, even then the responsibility is very minimal. In this backdrop, if we see, when India in particular speaks, India speaks from a position of strength and responsibility. And why am I saying so? Because not only the resolute domestic actions that we have taken, but also that for the extreme events which were briefly touched upon both by formerly the Minister Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, and Dr. Kirit Parikh, the extreme events both said that they are going to stay with us and they will increase in duration, frequency and intensity. So this is something that we have focused our attention, and India has created the CDRI, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. and also the ISA, the International Solar Alliance. And in the hard to abate sector, we are co-leading the lead IT transitions. So apart from doing nationally a lot, we are mindful of international actions also, and we have created these initiatives. In terms of our solar program, I must say that we have already installed 159 gigawatt of our target of 500 gigawatt of non-fossil electric capacity by 2030. And during the last 7.5 years, India's installed solar energy capacity has increased over 18 times and stands more than 54 gigawatt. And also, let me remind you that with 1.3 billion people, India has achieved 24% reduction in emissions intensity of its GDP in 2016 itself, exceeding its pre-voluntary 2020 target. And we have a number of initiatives. I don't have to count them here. You all know that to accelerate proliferation and adoption of zero-emission vehicles, we are focusing on two-wheelers, three-wheelers, public transport vehicle segments for sustainable mobility and reduction of emissions from the transport sector. Honorable Minister also touched upon the National Hydrogen Energy Mission, which seeks to position India as a green hydrogen hub. And let me say that for us, the foundational principles of UNFCCC, equity, CBDR are sacrosanct. Strong mitigation actions by the developed countries, perhaps for reaching net zero well before 2050, is the need of the hour. And our ethos, which were also touched upon by Mr. Suresh Prabhu, India's ethos of sustainability and human-centric efforts, evident in the lifestyle for environment movement or life, calls for individual and collective of every individual to take action for a better planet and become a pro-planet people movement worldwide. So with this brief introduction, I would say again, let me end my intervention by saying that nature cannot be taken for granted. Nature protects if she is protected. And that is the logo of the ministry where I work. Prakruti Rakshati Rakshita. Nature cannot be taken for granted. And as I said, let me again repeat that when India says on matters of global importance like biodiversity, climate change, and so on, we speak from a position of strength and responsibility because we are mindful of the problem at hand. We have taken resolute domestic actions and international actions. Also, our international actions, India's international global actions are second to none. Sir, should we now invite the panelists to over to you, sir.
We have 4 panelists, and the themes, as we know, we have already been circulated, which says what are the country level policies and actions we need, what are the importance and benefits of regional cooperation, and how do we enhance the regional research capacity building requirement to enable policy gender sensitive and inclusive growth. So may I now, we have about 30 minutes or 35 minutes, let's say, and we have 4 speakers, 4 panelists. So let me invite, without taking any more time, Sri Syed Munir Khasru, Chairman, the Institute of Policy Analysis and Governance, IPAG in Bangladesh. Sri Khasru.
Yes. Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Should I start?
Yeah, please. Please start.
Just a second. Just a second. Can everyone hear me? I just wanted to check.
We can hear you and see you both.
First of all, thank you so much to both IRADe and IDRC for having invited me. And I think many of the things which already have been said captures very much the essence of some of the topic that we have been invited to speak. And I particularly have been requested to speak on South Asia as well as Bangladesh. And these are issues I'm pretty sure if we keep on talking, we can spend a day or more, but time is limited. And I have to make some advance apologies because I may not be able to be around because South Asia, always things get a little delayed. So we are used to this, but I may have to leave after 6:30, but I will not waste any more time. I mean, we all are in a situation when even as we meet, we have seen what is happening around the world. I mean, on one side, we have Bangladesh and India facing flood, and then Europe going through heat waves, and same thing is happening in Australia, which is under flood, Sydney and other. So we are going through very precarious times, looking globally. Regionally, we tend to represent 1/4 of global population, very densely populated region of the world, which also houses 1/3 of global poor. And before the pandemic, in fact, we are one of the fastest growing region in the world, South Asia. So we are a region which draws attention globally for very legitimate reasons. Growth, population, market size, climate change, so on and so forth. Having said that, Bangladesh, as you know, was the president of the Climate Vulnerable Group until recently when we handed over the presidency to Ghana, and our Prime Minister was leading that forum quite actively. Even in the last COP26, she played a very active role in terms of voicing the danger Bangladesh, Maldives, many other countries are facing. Now, the particular issue on which we have converged today, that is low carbon development, it has a lot of ramification, just as it's become a catchword in all the new climate change initiatives that we're seeing. The reality is, for many countries like Bangladesh, even India, the realities are not that easy. And I'll give you a few quick examples. Like, for example, currently we have a Bangladesh climate change resilient fund managed by a multi-donor agency led by World Bank. Then we have a Bangladesh Climate Trust Fund led by the government of Bangladesh. The reason I'm citing this example, countries like Bangladesh, which are resource constrained, at times are also in a difficult situation in terms of accessing the finance and the conditionalities that comes along with it. And in many cases, we have had tension between our government and the donor community like the World Bank. So for example, while government is putting 20% of the fund on mitigation, World Bank fund is putting 40% of the fund on mitigation. And what indicates that policy prescription that we tend to undertake, which the Honorable referred to, it is a very risky proposition to have a very cookie cutter approach. Because countries like Bangladesh and India, which have very huge segmentation difference in different strata of the society, do not have the luxury to have one approach and apply it through all the sectors. For example, a country like Bangladesh, say forest, water, land, would be very critical areas where any government would be more sensitive to sort of livelihood consideration, meaning people's income, poverty alleviation, as opposed to carbon development. These are the realities. Now, where do we bridge the gap? There are a couple of serious disconnects between what LCT aspires and where countries like Bangladesh stand. First, foremost, finance is a big issue. And government, even the development community itself will not be enough. We need to focus on the private sector. And to get private sector engaged, we need to sufficiently incentivize. Even financial institutions, they have to be encouraged to come up with innovative financial mechanism so that banks or lending institutions are encouraged to finance low carbon technology, green technology, so on and so forth. And at a global scale, if you look what is happening with big private sector tech companies, Google is leading the way in terms of financing a lot of solar, wind power. Then Microsoft has a project Terra Power, which is basically a nuclear company, which is supporting greenhouse. Then we have in Sweden, the Eco Data Center, which is the first carbon negative data center. So, and then we have Amazon financing low emission forest finance. So we need to find ways to do smart climate diplomacy, which is very important for countries like Bangladesh and India to go out to the world and try to reap on those funds which they are there. Second, capacity building. Now, in this region, we have many well-respected institutions. We have a lot of bright individuals, even who are sitting across the table today. Unfortunately, even at knowledge sharing, South Asia lags behind. We have a South Asia Energy Institute sitting in Islamabad. We hardly have seen them, and in none of these conferences I see them. So we have an officially designated Energy Connectivity Institute in one of the countries, which hardly we see face. Chronic problem of South Asia. Then technology. Now, technology, which in a number of occasions in the past I have written, including in last COP26, can be one of the cost-effective game changer. Because this is, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's the cutting-edge technology many companies are coming out, that can be one of the very cost-effective bridge. And Bangladesh, for example, we have done a pretty good job in solar home system. And in many countries that emulated, India has done a lot of good job in producing solar panels, which are very affordable. We need more sharing. Now, coming into Bangladesh, if you look at our country, in 1980, only 0.01% people have access to electricity. Far over 2022, 92% people have access. So this 40-year growth obviously has been fueled by energy, and almost more than 60% of our energy demands are met by fossil fuel. And of the renewable energy, almost more than 60% comes from solar, and then about 30 to 40% comes from small hydro, then biogas. So on that also, the government has ambition to generate 40 gigawatt by 2040. And Bangladesh currently is graduating from LDC to middle income, and is currently one of the fastest growing economies of this region. So when you grow, it has its own fair share of pain. So we are in the twofold challenge where we need to grow quickly. We do want to fulfill the ambition of moving to the League of Developed Economies by 2040. But to do that, the two-pronged challenge of having renewable energy, sustainable energy, that puts us into the very title of the session, that low carbon development and inclusive growth. So in my opinion, 3-4 things which I've tried to spell out in the last few minutes: greater regional connectivity, innovative financing mechanism, technology, and more private sector involvement. That probably, in my opinion, are the 4 key pillars which hopefully will help us connect the dotted line between the 2 pillars we're talking about. So given that I've been given 4 or 5 minutes to make the initial remarks, I hope I've been within my limits, but I'll be very eagerly looking forward to my fellow panelists and try to be there as possible. And if I have to leave a little early, my advance apologies to the chair. Thank you so much.
I invite Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh, is the Director, Center for New Economic Diplomacy, Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata, India. Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh.
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible? Am I audible, Chair?
Please go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. So do I have 10 minutes?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So thanks to Chair, thanks to IRADe for inviting me into this particular panel discussion. As such, when we talk about the development story of the developing world, what we find that it has largely focused on economic growth with scant recognition of the costs of growth, and the Asian growth story falls adequately in that category. And that's a fact that growth entails creation of new capital through large expenditures, In most cases, the cost imposed on the society and the natural ecosystem have been way too overwhelming so as to raise questions on the efficacy of such investments. Yet there is no denying on the critical role of physical capital in promoting economic growth. Though in fact, the empirical evidence of physical infrastructure enhancing overall business environment and economic competitiveness at the macro scale is quite ample. Now, on the other hand, we find that SDGs have not only become the cornerstone of global development governance, but development governance at all levels, even at the most micro level of an institutional governance setup. And it is in this context when we talk about the most recent attack of the pandemic, of the scale of COVID-19, it not merely comes in the way of the SDGs, but talks about rethinking of the timeline. And as such, meeting these goals were not easy. The pandemic has only made it even more challenging, even more harder. Climate change in this entire scheme of things remains the overarching critical stressor, and the actions needed to combat such forces are Herculean. Key challenge that has emerged in this climate game, of course, is financing. And the challenge of mobilizing this green money becomes even more acute when one considers that large parts of the developing and the underdeveloped world, especially in this part of Asia that we are talking of, are still struggling to obtain the finance for meeting the basic developmental needs. And here arise the imperatives for obtaining funding in addition to the traditional overseas development assistance for climate change adaptation. The problem, however, lies elsewhere. Despite the existence of various financing sources, there has been an inherent funding or financing bias, more than 80%, I would say, in favor of climate change mitigation activities. And this is even true for the GCA, for the Green Climate Fund. And let me quote a few data here. As of October 2021, this is the data that I have for the latest one. In fact, it has recently been updated as well. It suggests that of the 190 approved projects, 43% are adaptation projects and 32% are mitigation projects, while the remaining 25% are cross-cutting. But the fund allocation towards mitigation has been as high as 65%, thereby clearly revealing the dominance of the mitigation projects. Now, while this low level of funding to adaptation may be due to the fact that adaptation to climate change might sound as a new activity for which there is no real pre-existing expertise available, it is also the mindset that adaptation provides primarily local benefits. Now, the LDCs and the small island developing nations, they contend that GCF has largely failed to channel funding to the most vulnerable communities in the most vulnerable countries, because it has approached its mandate as a bank seeking returns on its investment in terms of repayment of loans. Now, it needs to be remembered here that it's a large underdeveloped and the developing segment that we are operating with, where adaptation has to be the key. Now, if I talk about the overall post-pandemic economic recovery, which has largely focused on economic growth, the conflict essentially arises as it is universally acknowledged that global warming and climate change are results of unbridled human penchant for economic growth without acknowledging the costs of growth, something that I just mentioned. Now, again, most of the climate commitments by the developing world hinges, including in fact in South Asia, it hinges largely upon energy transition from fossil fuel sources to renewable energy sources. And large parts of the global South still perceive that mere energy transition will resolve the problems of climate change. And eventually they continue with unbridled land use change and destruction of ecosystem for meeting infrastructure needs. In course of this unbridled penchant for economic growth and urbanization, there hardly remains the acknowledgement that forest and coastal ecosystems are carbon sinks, whose roles in stocking carbon and annual carbon sequestration cannot be substituted by mere energy transition. Rather, such unbridled land use change for infrastructure projects, actually they are counteracting with the positive impacts that would otherwise be obtained by energy transition. Now comes the entire concern of this green agenda. Now, this has different connotation in different parts of the world. Rather, this further leads to a huge divergence in delineation of green recovery of the pandemic, from the pandemic. And here lies the problem, rendering a uniform interpretation to the green recovery across the world. Now, the OECD agenda of green recovery essentially rests on three priorities. A, that you inhibit the spread and eradicate the virus. B, you create enabling conditions for broad-based recovery. And C, create opportunities to kick off economic growth while simultaneously pursue the priorities in the decade of action to achieve 2030 SDGs, agenda for SDGs. Now, OECD and many others, they have argued that climate action creates these opportunities for economic growth, incomes, and jobs, and they have been harping on multilateralism as the mode to essentially achieve this entire proverbial green growth. So this above thesis propagates that green growth is going to be the solution to preventing degradation of natural ecosystem, reconciling between environmental ambitions, conservation goals, combat climate change. Now, the bigger concern is with the very definition of green growth. If green growth is delineated through mere energy transition, whereas the ecosystem destruction goes unbridled in the name of urbanization and economic growth, then definitely green growth is an oxymoron. Now, this contention becomes prominent if we talk about the decoupling of natural resource use and economic growth. Now, is such delinking practically possible? It is not merely practically impossible, but even axiomatically infeasible, as human life and livelihood and civilizational progress are inextricably connected to the most fundamental form of capital, that is natural capital, which is delineated in classical economics as land. And very recently, there's been a paper published in Clause 1. The title of the paper is Decoupling GDP Growth from Environmental Impact Possible? It talks of a macro model by Ward et al. And they come up with the conclusion that the mounting costs of uneconomic growth suggest that the pursuit of decoupling, if it were possible in order to sustain GDP growth, would be a misguided effort. Now, this argument becomes even more prominent in case of land or natural capital, especially in the developing world. I think my previous speaker was also referring to this because this is inextricably linked to livelihood in this part of the world. Now, Pawan Sukhdev's paper, Costing the Nature, this was published in 2009 in Nature, talked about the importance of natural capital in providing the ecosystem services, which he also interpreted as GDP of the poor. Now, this phenomenon is prevalent, especially in the global south, as large component of the poor's incomes emerges from the ecosystem services. And the paper revealed that 57% of the poor incomes in India are sourced from nature. Unfortunately, impacts of human interventions through land use change and climate change on ecosystem services are not figured into any form of global negotiations. Climate negotiations remain largely a temperature-centric one without taking into consideration this critical element that should have been the foremost concern of Global South as also South Asia. Now, on the other hand, in fact, we talk about the degrowth school, which has been propagating, in fact, that deceleration rather than growth has to sustain the very fundamental basis of life on the planet, thereby proposing this as the solution. Now, given this has a very Occidental construct that you simply retract, and given this
kindly conclude, please.
Sure. So from this perspective, that whether this Occidental construct of degrowth, it also finds its supporters in some of the elitist activists in Global South. A developing nation cannot adopt such ideals, as has been exhibited by the Sri Lankan economy. So let me just conclude in here that from a very Indian perspective, all I can say is that the Indian green recovery or the South Asian green recovery has to rest on two key elements: the simultaneous augmentation in health and education induced human and physical capital without compromising the sustainability of the natural capital, and B, reduced wealth, income, and social inequalities that are slated to come in the way of long-run growth prospects, thereby serving the cause of distributive justice. So I'd like to stop here. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. May I now invite Dr. Tusista Sugathapalla, Senior Technical Expert, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, SLYCAN or SLYCAN Trust, Sri Lanka.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Sugathapalla.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yeah. I'm representing SLYCAN Trust, a think tank involved with key areas of activities like evidence-based research, communication and outreach, legal and policy analysis, multi-stakeholder partnerships or engagement, then capacity building and knowledge sharing, also facilitating change, which are very relevant to the today's topic. That's why I highlighted there. So let me go into the key questions I want to address through this brief speech. First, in the local interventions, especially in policy level, looking at this green growth or low carbon pathways. So these are also, I think, very common to the region. So most of these key interventions initiated in Sri Lanka are evolved around, I would say, two main themes. One's under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and SDGs. Other one on Paris Agreement on Climate Change and National Determined Contributions. So in particular, when you look at the National Determined Contributions, as a country, we have submitted this updated National Determined Contribution, which highlighted basically the policy and the other interventions by the government on these low carbon pathways, particularly highlighting 6 sectors of mitigations and several sectors of adaptation. I will talk about mitigation mainly. So here we are talking about the power sector, industry, transport, waste, agriculture and forestry as the key areas, in which, of course, we are having different targets, in which the key mitigation target is coming from power sector, in which we have also highlighted that by 2030, the Sri Lanka wants to reach 70% renewables by to get electricity generation. That's one of the key activity. So that's one of the huge tasks we are having here, which of course highlight the need for this type of collaboration. That's why I highlighted that. So in fact, presently we have around 2,600 renewable energy, megawatt renewable energy. The target is to reach around 11,000 in coming 11,000 megawatt in coming 7.5 years, which basically indicate the challenges we are having ahead. Mainly it will come from solar and wind. And also in the NDCs, we also pledge for carbon neutrality in the energy sector by 2050, as well as the zero carbon status in the overall economic sector. So we have pledged for this carbon neutrality by 2050. That will become also a key, the challenge, as well as a pathway towards the low carbon economy. And presently, the government has now prepared the implementation plan for NDCs, which is under implementation now, as well as just initiated to develop the roadmap for carbon neutrality that will be finalized within this year. That is targeting 2050. And another initiative by the local initiative I can highlight here is related to funding. I think that's also came up earlier. The Central Bank of Sri Lanka has launched the Sri Lanka Green Finance Taxonomy a few months back, May 2022, which will, with the support of IFC, which provides the financial institution for a sound framework to issue green financing products such as green bonds and so on. And which is in now implementation. That's will try to address some of these financial, divert the financing to green economic side. And also we are now involved with establishing what we call this sustainable development goal investor platform, or the investor map, with the aim of leveraging private financing for implementation of SDGs, especially looking at the green side. So that also try to address the gaps in investment. That's also highlighted there. The importance of private sector investment is it's already highlighted. So this will provide the data, information, potential areas of investment and business models for the private sector to come in and support, SDG related activities or projects. Some of the few other initiatives by the government, the recent initiatives are the government has revised the National Environment Policy. It's about to publish now, and also very recently published the updated or revised the National Environmental Action Plan 2022-2030. Both these documents highlights the importance of this low carbon economy. And in addition, especially to integrate these low carbon concepts into the broader development, the government just came up with a kind of a policy paper to be submitted to the cabinet for approval. That's on National Green Development Agenda. That basically will define in the local context what this green development means. As highlighted earlier, we are looking at not just green growth, like the economic growth, but looking at the more social and environmental dimensions, especially looking at green development as an effective pathway to reach sustainable development goals. So we are combining, basically integrating sustainable development goals with climate actions and also green development. Another important initiative, again, to facilitate some of the gaps what we highlighted here, is to establish a platform for multi-stakeholder engagement. That's been initiated now. This will indicate for different stakeholders, especially the government, the central government, the local governments, as well as private sector, NGOs, community-based organizations, all these stakeholders, how they can get engaged with the policy making, the decision making, and contributing to climate actions and SDGs. So those are some of the initiatives by the Sri Lankan government to mainstream this low carbon economy. Quickly going into the final question, basically regarding what's the important and benefits from regional cooperation. Basically, when we look at these challenges we are facing, SDGs or even climate actions, the much of these ambitious climate goals are challenging. It requires transformational changes in the system. We are looking at systemic changes. So some of the indicators shows that the country's readiness level for transition is low. So we have a lot of challenges. So these challenges are too complex for us to handle alone. And while there are a lot of communities and the global nature of these challenges provide opportunities to collaborate. Thus, the collaboration and solidarity within the societies and between nations, especially look at the region, become a necessity. So some of the key areas for collaboration, very quickly, we think that wider regional cooperation and integration through digitization.
Please conclude.
Yeah, very quickly. Yes, yeah. E-commerce, resilient supply, those are important. Developing integrated solution for climate change is important, for which we need the collaborations. More open platform for policy dialogue, knowledge sharing and capacity building. Then pooling knowledge, resources, and greater efficiency of access. And finally, resilience and sustainable cross-border infrastructure and trade facilitation. These are, I think, areas for collaboration in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I now request Dr. Mani Nepal, lead economist, Sandy, EC mode at Nepal.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank IRADe and IDRC for inviting me to this event. My name is Mani Nepal. I work at Sandy, which is based in Kathmandu, and Sandy is at EC mode currently. So Sandy is a research capacity building network that works in the region. It has been there for a long time, and it works in the issues of the interaction between environment and development that includes climate change, mitigation, impact evaluation, adaptation, and resilience building. So I earlier shared a link of a book that is just published from our network that has been came out a few months back, which has a lot of information and the activities that the communities are doing in the region to adapt to climate change and building their resilience. So So from like our experience in the region, working for a long time, supporting researchers to building research capacity, funding different research projects, that brings in like a locally grounded research output as evidence-based for this policy making. So what we found is basically, most of the time, research can be used for informing policies. My connection was a little bit of like, so what we found basically, even if we have like a policy impact or influence out of the research, we must often failed in implementation. So what I felt is like, implementation science is very much needed in terms of when we look at the capacity building, I think we should start looking at the implementation science, how to actually, develop capacity of the people who are in the back, the grassroots or in the government, and actually help implement the policies and programs that we intend to implement. So that's the short background of where I'm from. Basically, when we say low carbon development, so that is, we all know it is a low emission growth path. But the low growth carbon, the low carbon growth alone is no longer sufficient to address the triple planetary crisis that we have been facing. Like climate change comes with, biodiversity loss and pollution. So these are the intricate, the issues that we need to now discuss a little bit more in this forum, this kind of forums. So therefore, our development thinking should move towards not only climate friendly, but also nature friendly, economical, and socially inclusive. So those are the the issues that are very important and critical, which may actually include elements like a cleaner production, circular economy, nature-based solution, sustainability, management, those kind of things. So these are the different types of elements within that, a greener growth or low carbon growth or sustainable growth. So with that, what I'm going to do is I just want to share a little bit of a perspective from Nepal's side, because because of the note that I got, I think I should share some of the information that Nepal has been doing. So if we look at the energy demand in Nepal, so we have industry gets around 4% demand, transport 7%, and the rest of the energy demand comes from the household and agriculture. But if you look at our plans and policies, they are more focused on the transport industry, all kind of things. So there we can get the there's this imbalance between where the most action is needed and where putting our most of the effort. So I think the case may not be quite different in other countries in the region. So, for example, in our case, in Nepal, electricity is 100% hydro, so it's clean. But if you look at the energy decomposition, 72% of the energy comes from the biomass. So even though our electricity is hydro, 100%, and about 18% comes from oil, 6% coal, and only 4% of the energy comes from hydro. So that means, if we want to look at move to the low emission growth path, we need to actually focus more on how to actually reduce the energy component that comes from the biomass or the solid fuel. Okay, so and that the energy demand comes from about 88% from agriculture and household. So let me look at the share within the household. About 65% of the energy demand comes from the cooking, the biomass. So which is highly polluting if we use in open, closed kitchen without ventilation, which has a lot of problems, including health impact. And we have about 30% LPGs here in Nepal right now, which is relatively better. Biogas quite low, 3%, and the rest about 2%. So that's the energy use that we use in our kitchen, and biomass use is quite problematic is we all know that it has a problem with the respiratory illness and all kind of health problems, including local, the pollution and also climate change issues, right? We emit a lot of GHGs when burning biomass. So this also puts stress in the local environment, like a deforestation, all kind of things. So when we look at this low carbon growth path, so the focus should be on how to actually help households and the farmers to actually reduce the use of these polluting energy sources. So Nepal intends to expand its hydroelectricity production and reducing the GHG emission by about 28% by 2030 through the move from fossil fuel-based transportation system to electricity-based system, and also moving away from the biomass to the electric stoves, all kind of things. But these are very challenging issues because of the nature of the supply of electricity. Sometimes it's not reliable, sometimes not like available, and even if we want to do it, it is difficult. And also people may not adapt even though we want to do it, right? So there are a lot of challenges in terms of adaptation, how to actually adapt these technologies. Yeah, last point I want to conclude by saying, so if we want to handle these issues, so we have the biomass energy, we have the biogas solar program, LPG, electricity, but all these come from different institutions, different sectors in the government. And there is a big, the collaboration issue when we want to implement jointly. So I think the policy, needs to be rethink and redesigned so that these things can be done the way the NDC actually, envisages to achieve by 2030. So that's the short, I want to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I request my co-chair, J.R. Bhatt, to summarize this.
Thank you very much. We have an echo problem, I believe. Is it? Can you set? You can mute the panelists for a while, now that they have taken the floor and spoken. So I would very quickly summarize. First of all, let me say that it is the commonality of our vibrant cultures which is the greatest binding glue in the region, that holds us together, that allows us to act together, and that allows all possibilities which are needed for addressing the global collective action problem of climate change, for tackling the bull by horn. And let me begin by thanking Mr. Syed Munir Khasru. Thank you very much, sir. And when one thinks of resilience, which is also a part of this workshop, this consultation meeting, one is reminded of the largest congregation of mangroves which are shared between Bangladesh and India. And thank you very much for pointing out a number of things, including greater regional connectivity, technology, finance, and so on. Thank you very much. Dr. Nilanjan Ghosh spoke about adaptation as an overwhelming concern. He also drew attention to the challenges of mobilizing new and additional finance for tackling climate change. And he also said that development is not just achieving the SDGs or basic minimum necessities. It is a larger goal befitting nations in the region. And especially when you see their civilization civilizational role and strategic needs and outlook. Dr. Thusita Sugatapala, I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you very much for drawing attention to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka for Green Finance Taxonomy, and also about the National Environment Policy, which embodies the low carbon strategies for growth, and also the National Green Development Agenda, to which you drew the attention. Thank you very much. And Dr. Mani Nepal, the lead economist at EC Mode, thank you very much for highlighting about ground level action and also about the hydropower. Thank you very much. So panelists, one and all, grateful thanks. And now let me express on behalf of my co-chair, Professor Parikh, at the outset, our sincere gratitude to Asia Regional Office, IDRC, for supporting this regional consultation meeting. These meetings provide a platform where people learn, share, introspect, and come out with recommendations. So thank you very much. We also would like to thank Dr. Anindya Chatterjee for delivering the inaugural remarks at the meeting. We express our thanks to the session chairs, Professor Menon, Professor Kirit Parikh, and our respected panelists for their contribution and for sharing their views. We are also very thankful to Professor Jyoti Parikh for her continued and constant guidance and support. And let me also say that to both Dr. Kirit Parikh and Jyoti Parikh, we find an ordinary thank you very inadequate to express our feelings. We are indeed very grateful to both of you, and I extend grateful thanks not only on my own behalf, but on behalf of all participants, and also on behalf of Government of India for hosting this very, very nice consultation meeting. We also thank Rohit Magotra, Deputy Director, IRADe and Group Coordinator. And we thank colleagues Ananya Bhatia, who had followed up the entire this thing and also asked me to be present today. Thank you very much. Yeah. And also Momita Shaw, Research Analysis, Dr. Jha, Senior Research Analyst, and Administration in the organization of this regional level consultation meeting. With that vote of thanks, I want to hand over to Dr. Parikh.
Yeah.
Again, once saying that Asia is the place, as the minister said, where great ideas have been born, great discoveries have been made, and it has shown the light to the world. So, and it is the commonality which is the binding glue, commonality of cultures, commonality of thinking, commonality of the way we perceive nature, we worship nature, and we constantly remind ourselves of frugal use of resources and not resort to profligacy. Over to you, Professor Parikh.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Bhatt. Thank you for your nice concluding comments. And may I now, all I have to say is please come and join for high tea outside.
A round of applause to IRADE, full team of IRADE.